Today on Locked On Canadiens and Locked On Columbus Blue Jackets, it was not 3-1. I mean, it technically was, but we're nice to our friends at Locked On Blue Jackets, and we're going to talk about the game. We've got plenty of comparisons of young talent coming up and a couple of mailbag questions.
You are Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Locked On Canadiens and Locked On Blue Jackets. It is a special crossover edition. We're doing a game recap and so much more. But first, this episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's term of use for details. My name is Laura Saba, and I'm not joined, as always, by the wonderful Scott Matla. In fact, I am joined by the equally wonderful, who I like to call not Matla, and that is Jay Forster, who you might know if you listen to this show. It's been a while since we've done a crossover, but Jay is our delightful friend from across the pond, and he and Scott have never been seen in the same room at the same time. And particularly on this episode, on this podcast, they've never been seen in the same podcast at the same time. So Jay, thank you so much, first of all, for agreeing to join me. I know you're on vacation, and I kind of wrote you into this, but I'm just so happy to talk to you, and I'm so excited that we have quite a wild game to recap today. How are you doing?
Yeah, lots happened in that game. I'm also super excited to record this because it has been a minute. Continually funny to me that Scott keeps being out of town. I think he's like avoiding me. I think that's what's going on. But I am doing okay. I am in Cincinnati right now, and that game was just real stupid from start to finish. Right?
It was a little bit crazy, and it was something where honestly it felt like here we go again. And to be honest, to be fair to the Montreal Canadiens, for the last little while they've had a really good first period, and then their second and third period have kind of gone off the rails in terms of the underlying numbers, in terms of the metrics. This one was kind of the opposite of that. So I first wanted to kind of get a little bit of an idea of what you expected from this game, because from my perspective, I just expected abject disaster.
I mean, this is about what I expected. We do predictions on Locked On Blue Jackets. So we try and predict who's going to score the first goal and what the final score is going to be. And I did predict a 4-3 win for the Blue Jackets, so I wasn't super far off. I definitely taken the over on goals just because I don't trust Cole Caufield not to go sicko mode. And the Blue Jackets have been pretty good at scoring goals recently. So it was about what I expected. I didn't expect all of the attempted murder in the first period. And I didn't expect the Blue Jackets to be so dominant in the first period and then just completely fall apart over the course of the second period before I think genuinely dying on the ice in the third period. And I haven't looked to see what their overtime numbers were, but I'm going to go ahead and assume that they were not. Oh, yeah, they dominated at overtime and then lost, obviously, because that's how this works,
This was that's really funny because while I was watching, I didn't necessarily feel that they dominated overtime, but I kept getting the feeling that they deserved to win, right? Like Columbus deserved to win. And Montreal kind of took that away from them. But I did want to point out that both of these teams are rebuilding teams, and they're kind of, it turns out, rebuilding at the same time. I would say that Columbus has maybe a 1.5 to 2 year head start, but it feels like fits and spurts a little bit. And it kind of feels like that because of the injuries, kind of like how Montreal's last year went. And I know you and I talked about it last year. We referenced it on this show, how last year, right out of the gate, there were a lot of key injuries on both teams. At some point, there were defensemen on the Blue Jackets where the longest tenured one was he played a season and a half, if I remember correctly.
The longest tenured Blue Jacket was at certain points during the season. The longest tenured Blue Jacket was Andrew Peak, who I think at the time had played about 170 NHL games and is 25 years of age. So that's
there you
what
go.
we're dealing with,
Well, at some point, I mean, at this point right now, Mike Matheson is the only like genuinely tenured NHL defenseman on the Montreal Canadiens. Everyone else is young and or injured. So I feel like the trajectory is kind of being interrupted. It's not, I don't want to say it's similar. Like I feel like on both sides it's being interrupted. And I know we're going to get into the young talent a little bit more in the second period. This is kind of disjointed because there's so many questions I want to ask. There's so much I want to talk about with respect to Columbus. Like we haven't even touched on Adam Fantilli yet, and I'm obsessed. So let's get back to this game real quick. What would you say the Blue Jackets did well on the ice? Because I thought even strength the Canadians were really good, and I feel like their special teams, even though they tend to look abysmal in general, looked a lot better this game than they have in the last couple of games. But I could be a bit biased there.
Yeah, I think both teams, the power play was great and the penalty kill was kind of suspect. If I'm not misremembering, I think the Blue Jackets had 2 power play goals, and I believe the Canadians also had 2 power play goals. They had at least one.
Mm-hmm.
So power play good on both sides. I thought the Blue Jackets were fine at even strength, especially again first period they were great. Second period they were kind of middling. Third period actively bad. I thought power play that was excellent. Penalty kill extremely poor. I thought it's gonna sound stupid. I thought goaltending was very good, especially for Elvis. I think he ended up making like 25 of 29 saves or something, which doesn't sound great. He allowed 4 goals on less than 30 shots.
And if you
But
look at the percentage, it's 852, right? It doesn't
yeah,
look
it's
great.
not, it's not what I could like look at the numbers and be like, oh, this was a great performance from him. But it was another case of, okay, well, it was 2 power play goals. The first goal was just a real stupid turnover that David Severson just his brain blue screened on it and he just didn't do anything as Nick Suzuki scored. And then like in overtime, it's Cole Caufield. What are you gonna do about it? So like he's had a couple of those games where he's played really well and like, yeah, the Blue Jackets needed 1 to 2 more saves from him, but I'm not. There were a lot of games last year where I came away from them thinking, wow, if Elvis had been better, we would have won that game. That like he was good enough to win this game, and the team in front of him just decided actually we don't want to kill penalties, so we'll just not do that. Okay, cool, bye.
I think the difference between Columbus and Montreal is Montreal's like, well, Columbus is like, oh, we're not going to kill penalties today. Maybe not. F that today. Montreal is just kind of like, well, we want to. How do you do this? All of a sudden, they forget even how to skate if they're on the penalty kill. But I absolutely adore that you said it's Cole Caufield. What are you going to do about it? Because that's how
Truly
I
though.
feel. I love him. And also like real quick to go back to Nick Suzuki, obviously, he struggled a little bit out of the gate to the point where people were asking Martin St. Louis about it. And Martin St. Louis said that he's not the type of person to like use the media to call out his player, but Suzuki knows that he needs to be better. They've had those conversations. I'm assuming they're going to continue. I think the problem with Nick Suzuki really was expectation more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he's necessarily been quiet. I think he just hasn't been trying the right things. And maybe he has he puts a lot of pressure on himself. Like he's very, very intense about this kind of thing. I thought that in this game he was markedly better than I expected.
I was very impressed with Nick Suzuki in this game. I mean, like, generally speaking, I'm impressed with Nick Suzuki. I think he's a really underrated player. And he was, I believe, second in all situations in shot attempts for on the team, or Corsi for percentage, whichever one you want to call it. Yeah, I don't know. I like Nick Suzuki a whole bunch, and I think the thing is that like some players are just slow starters. Henrik Lundqvist, who obviously a completely different situation, but it felt like he was always kind of a slow starter. And there'd be that talk every season of like, oh, it's November and his stats aren't good. Is he getting old? Is he washed or whatever? And then between November and April, he would just like be incredible. So like sometimes players are just slow to get out of the gate. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Nick Suzuki is still very young, but he's getting older. And so I think it is just a case of he's kind of learning, okay, I don't need to go hell for leather, like right out of the gate, like some of the younger kids do. But yeah, this game felt like a good sign. that's the Nick Suzuki that the Canadiens are going to need down the road.
And I do want to point out as well, because a lot of people were kind of sort of writing it off. He was like this in his first season as well. In his first season, people are like, why did the Canadiens even get this guy? And now you look at that trade with Vegas, and it's an absolute highway robbery fleecing thing. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about not just this game, but the Columbus Blue Jackets in general, because I do want to know a lot about their players. I want to talk very much about Adam Fantilli. Maybe let's just have a whole segment about Adam Fantilli. And that's all coming up in just one moment in this special crossover edition of Locked On Canadiens and Locked On Blue Jackets. But first, this episode is brought to you by Parkview Advance. As a business owner, you realize there are times when receivables might fall behind, but that doesn't mean you need to fall behind on vendor payments, payroll, or rent. For more than 25 years, Parkview Advance has helped businesses secure working capital from $5,000 to $1.5 million. Parkview Advance can approve your working capital in as little as 24 hours. It's a much easier process than you might imagine. We invite the many entrepreneurs that are Locked On NHL fans to learn more by calling us at 203-675-0071 or go to parkviewadvance.com. If your business needs working capital, call Parkview Advance today. Parkview Advance, helping businesses with their working capital. Go to parkviewadvance.com. All right, so let's get into the Columbus Blue Jackets and your terrible, terrible children. I want to start first with Adam Fantilli. Obviously, that was something where did it feel like something generational was falling into your lap without anybody even have to try anything?
When the Ducks drafted Leo Carlsson, I was in a hotel room in London, and I sat on the bed and I cackled like an absolute maniac because I'd heard the rumblings, I'd heard the whispers, I'd convinced myself it was wishful thinking. I'd heard that the Blue Jackets ranking was Fantilli and then Will Smith and then Leo Carlsson. So I was preparing myself that we were going to draft Will Smith third overall, and I was going to have to be mad about it. Like, no shade to Will Smith, but I was going to have to be mad about it. And this is not like a knock on Leo Carlsson. I think Leo Carlsson is a phenomenal young player. I think he's going to be the best player on the Ducks for a very long time. However, getting Adam Fantilli and like just watching him play over the past 7 games, he's exactly as advertised, and he is. We just talked about this today, actually, in an interview with someone else. He might be the best player in franchise history. And like, we're trying to temper our expectations, but like, this is what I imagine watching like young Rick Nash was like. You know, it was before my time because I'm a baby. But like that, this is what I just, every time he's on the ice, I just get so excited. I'm like, what's this kid gonna do next? Like, he had 3 points in his last 2 games before tonight, and you know, he was just getting better and better and better. And it feels like every game he figures something new out about the NHL and the way that the NHL plays, and he adapts. And I'm like, just so like, I can't talk about how excited I am because I do just keep going on and on and on about this kid who, you know, we're tempering our expectations. I'm not out here, you know, I like to joke about him winning the Calder, and I don't think, you know, Columbus is not automatically a playoff team with Fantilli, but between him and other young players taking steps forward, with the goaltending being solidified, with the defense made up of like actual defensemen and not babies and old men, it's real exciting. And Adam Fantilli is kind of at the forefront of that excitement for me.
I do want to ask about some of the other young players, but let's go back to Zach Werenski for a second, who is no longer a young Columbus Blue Jacket. I think he would be considered one of the veterans at this point, wouldn't he?
I feel a
So he
million
had a
years
great
old,
game.
but yes. He's, I think,
Yeah.
25, 26.
Yeah.
So.
I was crumbling in a corner when you mentioned you're a baby. So like, we're not gonna like focus too much on how old Zach Werenski is, but he had a phenomenal game tonight. And I know we wanted to talk about that, so I just wanted to circle back real quick.
I didn't realize how much this team had missed Zach Werenski until he came back. Because Zach Werenski got hurt, I believe, in the 13th game of last season. He was done for the season by mid-November, you know? And I think you guys are kind of seeing that a little bit with the Kirby Dach injury. You know, or imagine if, you know, if you lost Nick Suzuki at the beginning of the season and he was just done and you had to cope without him. Like, he's one of those players that you don't realize how good he is and what he does on the ice until he's not there anymore. And I didn't even really fully realize it until he came back this season, and I was like, oh, that's what this is like. It's a combination of he's just such a good defenseman that I think gets a bad rep because his contract is probably a little bigger than it needs to be. Like, just because he's not a $9.5 million defenseman every night does not mean that he's not a very, very good defenseman. So it's kind of a weird in-between thing, but he does the little things right. He can score, he can skate, he's, a more than competent defender in terms of, in defensive rankings on the team. But by him being here, it means that you can push guys back to their rightful positions. Like, our first defense pairing last season was Andrew Peak and Eric Gabranson for large part of the season. Yeah, you don't need Eric Gabranson you don't need him playing 27 minutes a night, and that's kind of what he was doing near the end of last season. So he's playing, 15, 16 minutes a night. Looks like a whole new defenseman. Ivan Provorov has been kind of getting a bad rep because both of the overtime winners have kind of been his fault. So the Blue Jackets lost to the Ducks in overtime on Tuesday night. Clear breakaway. Provorov did what he could to get back. Wasn't enough. And then tonight, he didn't do enough, in my opinion, in overtime. But for the most part, he's been very good for the Blue Jackets. Damon Severson has, again, kind of quietly been excellent, apart from some gigantic brain farts that I think we saw in New Jersey as well. He'd be very, very good, and then he would just completely, just shut down for a second and then reboot. But it's too late. The mistake's already happened, So he's been very good, and so it means that those guys don't have to play on that number one defense, especially Provorov. Provorov doesn't have to be the guy here because Werenski's the guy, and so I think we get a better Provorov than they got in Philadelphia because he's in a more ideal role on the second pairing. So it's kind of a knock-on effect of Zach Werenski makes everyone better because he's a good person to play with, and with him eating all of those minutes, it means that we don't have to play players like Eric Gabranson or literal 19-year-olds for 25 to 28 minutes a night.
Speaking of literal 19-year-olds, we did take a circle back into the defense. I did want to ask about of the young prospects who have either not yet made the Blue Jackets or are about to or have had a couple of games. Who do you think is an underrated player that we should be looking out for? Because I got to tell you, I did watch that New Jersey game. It was a bit frustrating at times, but I've been trying to choose exciting players and exciting teams to watch this year. So obviously I've been trying to get a little bit of Buffalo. I've been very curious about Detroit. Haven't had a chance to watch that much, but I'm trying to fall back in love with the idea of hockey teams with potential and promise. So who's an underrated or under the radar type player? Who would be your sleeper pick to be somebody to watch over the next couple of years?
If on the team right now, so David Juracek got sent down at the end of training camp. He was not on the opening night roster. He got called up when Zach Werenski got injured in the home opener because, again, this team is cursed and this is what happens. Played the 2 games that Werenski was out, and you looked at the team, and there's just no excuse to take him out of the lineup. And so he's been in the lineup. I think this is his 5th straight game or his sixth game. He's not going back to Cleveland, I don't think. He is another one of those players that you can almost see him, and you could see this with Kent Johnson last season as well. You can almost see them working it out on the ice. You can see things click in a way that's really, really satisfying and really gratifying to watch. And so David Juracek, I think, is maybe not going to be a star defenseman. I don't think he's going to be, Cale Makar level, but I think he's going to be a very, very good defenseman on this team. I think he's probably going to be the best defenseman on this team in maybe 5 years' time.
Oh, wow.
Which is really exciting. If you're looking for a guy that's not on the team yet, but probably will make the team soon, Corson Ceulemans is a really, really exciting player. He's kind of the first round draft pick that got forgotten about because the Blue Jackets had 6 of them over the past 3 drafts, and everyone got really excited about Johnson and Sillinger in 2020. Corson Ceulemans was the third first-round draft pick that the Blue Jackets had in that season. So he kind of gets forgotten about because then obviously Juraj and Matejchuk get drafted next year, Adam Fantilli the year after that, and Corson Ceulemans is over here. Like, I think he was leading his team in scoring as by defenseman in his freshman year and his sophomore year at Wisconsin, and he's a very raw player, I think, but to me that's exciting because you can kind of look at what the Blue Jackets organization needs and then just like mold them into that, you know.
Right.
So if you need an extra offensive defenseman, you can probably make that Corson Ceulemans into that. Do you need a defensive defenseman? Do you need a two-way guy? Do you need a stay-at-home guy? Like, there's a lot of possibilities with Ceulemans' game, and I think that's really exciting.
We haven't talked about Cole Sillinger yet this season, and we're going to do that. And we're going to do some mailbag questions as well. And all of that is coming up in the next segment. But first, this episode is brought to you by Sleeper. A new NHL season, which is what we're now in, brings all sorts of possibilities. Maybe a player on your team scores 50 goals, or your team, not mine, your team might hoist the Stanley Cup. And you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL network. Sleeper is our #1 choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contexts. I personally, for me, I know we're all watching, the players that were recently drafted, but I feel like I need to go to the tried and true players. Somebody like, I hate to say it, an Austin Matthews, somebody like Connor McDavid. Those are the types of players that, I would consider a player to take to win 100 times the money. And all any of us have to do is pick these players, record more or less their sleeper projections for anything like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, or more in any given game. And to win a 100-time bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Canadiens fans and Blue Jackets fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right, it's almost time for the mailbag, and we're going to do, full disclosure, we're only going to do select mailbag questions because there's a lot of them that are a little bit more Canadiens focused, and Scott and I will do them next week. We've got plenty of late night games, so we'll be doing a lot of late night mailbag, so make sure you catch all those episodes. There is, I believe, a Vegas game that's really late and a Coyotes game that's really late, and for whatever reason, they're in the middle of the week, so brutal. Either way, that's when we'll ask the bulk of the mailbag questions, but I think I want to talk real quick about Cole Sillinger. We've only got about 7 minutes left of this episode, so we can't do an episode without talking about him. How's he doing?
He is doing much better than he was last season. I think last season he took a real knock to his confidence, has kind of built himself back up. He has started developing some really nice chemistry with Kent Johnson, which is very funny because I feel like they are just complete polar opposites in terms of like personality and things like that. So that's fun. If they find them another winger that can click with those two, I think that, and that's the third line at the minute. I think that's going to be a really sneakily underrated third line. I don't believe he has a ton of points, but he has looked really, really good. Let me see if I can pull his points real quick. I like Cole Sillinger a lot. I'm happy that he seems to have kind of figured it out. He's growing some truly awful facial hair at the minute, but like he's 20 years old, so I'll allow it. He has 2 assists in 7 games so far, which doesn't sound great, but like I said, I think he's looked really great from like the neck down. But no, I think he's figured it out. I think last year was a real year. Like, it's a sophomore slump, sometimes it happens. And I think he's come back this season ready to kind of forget that and to get on with being a player that, the Blue Jackets picked at 12th overall.
Right. And that was the thing too, is that like, I know that he's one of the players that you were most excited about and had like a lot of like had projected to with a high ceiling. Well, I've forgotten how to talk. Like, this is my job and I can't talk. This is one of my jobs, everybody. But yeah, so like I feel like we were really, really excited about him. And then there were some issues last year. And I think this kind of ties into some of our mailbag questions. Scott did an episode yesterday about Juraj Slafkovsky, and a lot of our mailbag questions have to do with Slafkovsky, and most of it is people telling each other either to calm down or that they're not worried about Slafkovsky enough. So I did kind of want to pick your brain on this a little bit because I feel like as a Habs fan, I have this inherent bias where I want to be proven wrong. Like that was not the pick that I would have wanted. But if you look at the rest of that draft, I don't necessarily think that, whoever it was Shane Wright versus Juraj Slafkovsky. Slafkovsky ended up going first, and then Shane Wright dropped to, I believe it was fourth or fifth, and Seattle took him. I feel like Logan Cooley would have been the one. Like in hindsight, he's the one that I would have chosen, if that makes
for
sense.
sure. But I think there's a lot of, and this might be me just kind of seeing my little corner of Habs Twitter that I see, because that's simply not my business. There's a lot of like revisionist history going on of, man, the Habs could have had Cooley and Mitchkov, and they're getting Slafkovsky and Reinbacher, and like the Habs were never going to draft Logan Cooley. No one saw this coming from Logan Cooley. Like there was no way that the Canadiens, excuse me, were going to take him. It was going to be Wright or Slafkovsky, and like I personally liked Shane Wright a lot more. I don't know how well that take has aged, obviously, with Slafkovsky being in the NHL and Shane Wright in the AHL, but
Also
they're
not
still
doing all that great.
extremely young players, both of
Yeah.
them, and I think what I think you're going to get at here is, and forgive me for trying to like predict the question, but like I don't know that you're allowed to worry about a player's development until they've at least turned 21.
Yeah.
It's very much, and we go through this as well, like in the Blue Jacket side of things. There's a
Do
lot of
you
talk about this player's a bust, this player's a bum, this player should never be in the NHL, and you look and they're like talking about a 22-year-old.
Right.
Like sure there are some worrying signs in his game. I didn't think Slafkovsky had a great game today. Maybe that's just because I wasn't paying all that much attention to the Canadian
No,
side
he
of
played
things.
better the previous game, I think it
He
was.
was perfectly fine.
He was
He didn't
fine.
have a
Yeah, he
bad
was fine.
game, but he wasn't, noticeable in the way that some players are.
He wasn't
Like,
dominant, and I think that's what people keep waiting for. But I don't think he's being assigned dominance assignments, if that makes
mhm.
sense. I think his assignments are a little bit sheltered because I got into a lot of trouble saying that the Canadians were taking it slow, and they're like, "What do you mean they're taking it slow? They put him in the NHL." And I think the assignments that he's being given, like to me, say that they're taking it very slow with him. But I think you're right because what I wanted to ask you is like you have a very significant corner of Habs Twitter, like a very a highly specialized corner of
It's
Habs
like 4
Twitter.
people, yeah.
Yeah, but like for me, like in terms of like the Columbus Blue Jackets fans, a lot of the times the ones that I encounter are the people leaving really mean messages in your show comments, and I get really angry at them. I'm curious, like, does this sky is falling thing happen with you guys as well?
Oh, 100%. It happened with Sillinger last year when, and last year was weird, and some things that happened were, I think, because Cole Sillinger probably got rushed to the NHL too early. He was 18. He was the youngest player in the NHL by like at least a year last
Yeah.
in his rookie season. Probably he should have gone back to WHL, the USHL for whatever reason. They put him in the NHL because the team was terrible, and they were like, "Hey, why not?"
Hmm.
Last season, I think he struggled. He didn't get consistent ice time. He didn't get consistent line mates. And I think honestly, the most important thing at that age is more than assignments, more than like who your specific line mates are, but consistency is key for me. And he didn't get that. He was bounced up and down the lineup. He was bounced in and out of the lineup. Eventually got sent down to Cleveland, where he finished the season. He's kind of come back this training camp. I thought he looked good, but not great. And then, yeah, he's had at least one consistent line mate for most of the season now. He's kind of been stuck. Him and Johnson have kind of been stuck together because I think what Pascal Vincent, the head coach, is doing is building lines based on duos. So like
Hmm.
he's kind of stuck Gaudreau and Marchenko together. He's stuck Fantilli and Line together, and then he's kind of building around that. For better or worse, Kent Johnson and Cole Sillinger have been stuck together. And I'm going very long on this answer. I will wrap it up in just a minute, but I think that for me is the thing that kind of I don't worry as much anymore because, again, he's 20 years old, and just because he had one bad season, he had a bad sophomore season. That's not a reason to, the sky is falling, throw the whole player in the bin and start again, And I think there's kind of been a little bit of that with Slafkovsky last season when he went to the NHL and wasn't immediately dominant despite being a first overall pick,
Yeah. Yeah. And
Sometimes it doesn't. Look at Jack Hughes.
right.
Jack Hughes had, 20 points in his rookie season? And now he's got 17 points in, 6, 7 games? It goes back to what we were saying about Nick Suzuki. Some guys are slow starters. Some guys just take a little bit longer to bake. Like, I'm the opposite of worried about Slafkovsky. Is he going to be the dominant force that a lot of Canadiens fans think he could be? Like, maybe not, but I think his ceiling is still high enough that, like, it's okay to chill out and wait for him to get better. And the other thing as well, like one more thing, the Canadiens are not going to be challenging for the cup in at least a couple of seasons, right? So it's not like there's all this pressure that he needs to be ready now. He needs to go now. He needs to join this core, and they can start pushing for the playoffs.
Right.
He
He's
will
not the
grow
missing
as the team
piece.
grows.
Yeah, he's not the missing piece, and it's not like the Canadiens are not going to contend because he's not ready, right?
Right.
Right. And I really love that answer because like I'm starting to get really influenced by just the discourse in general, and I'm like, should I be worried? I keep saying we shouldn't be worried, and I'm like, should I be worried? And I have one last question. It is a mailbag question. It is specifically for you because you are based in the UK. Somebody's going. I think it's Ryan Lee, or our good friend Ryan Lee, is going to the United Kingdom very soon and wants to know how to watch the NHL from the UK.
So the fun thing about the UK/Europe is that NHL TV still exists. I know that they've kind of killed it over in North America, but I have NHL TV. That's how I watch. Also, you can get I have a VPN for work, and so I can use that to access Hulu and ESPN. So if you are a subscriber there, you can do that. But yeah, if you want to just, depending on how long you're there, just like get a free trial of NHL TV. I think they give you like a week free or whatever,
Oh,
or
that's
just
fun.
get it for a month and then cancel it, and you can watch all of the games to your heart's desire, and have a good time or not a good time, depending on what Canadians team you're watching.
Yeah, it
Listen, I
depends
can
on what
say
we're
that because I have watched some miserable Blue Jackets games over the past 2 seasons. So, like, I get it, Habs fans. I really, truly get it.
It's gonna be an interesting season, I think. If people just stop dying on the ice like that, that would make me happy. In the meantime, we are gonna wrap this episode up. Jay, thank you so much for doing this crossover with me. Let's start with the Blue Jackets show. Where can people find you?
Yeah, I do a bit about how I can't, in good conscience, recommend people paying attention to the Blue Jackets, but we're doing okay at the minute. So you can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter. We are wherever you listen to Locked On Canadiens, every podcast app you can think of. We're over on YouTube, we're on Sirius XM, and how about you, Laura? Where can my wonderful Blue Jackets everydayers tune in for their Josh Anderson content?
I also cannot, in good conscience, recommend you follow the Montreal Canadiens. But if you want any Josh Anderson or Cole Caufield small goals boy content, you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, anywhere you find Locked On Blue Jackets, as well as on YouTube. And we are on Twitter at LO_Canadiens. You can find me at The Active Stick, and you can find my co-host at Scott Matla. Pretty much everywhere. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we will both see you next time.